Haidong. In this video, we're going to talk about wrapping your sword. A quick disclaimer, because I'm not a professional sword wrapper. I am a sword user, and my swords sometimes come undone. So this is something that I've kind of figured out throughout the years of how to, again, engage with a sword, wrap a sword so it doesn't like fall apart. I have my own kind of weird way of doing it, but hopefully it's going to make sense. So if you're in a similar situation, hopefully this can help. Double caveat, because why only one caveat? So I'm going to be using a Manuki in my sword, which is not always in a Korean sword. So if you're coming from a Gumdo or Korean place of practice, that may not be normal. Again, the knot I'm going to be using at the very end is also not normal. But this is for people who don't want to, pay like a famous sword wrapper or use like glue or adhesives or anything like that. So if you really wanted to, you could reuse the Tsuka ito, so the wrapping of the sword, if you really want to. But that's the second caveat. Alright, so today we're going to be learning how to actually rewrap the sword handle, as you can probably tell. So this is a Gumdo Seigum, so they no longer make these for whatever reason, and this is what they look like when they don't have their wrapping, right? So there's a thin strip of fake sagawe, right? So the fake ray skin, and it's pretty bare wood on both sides. Now, what I would recommend before you even get started is if your metal is clearly in need of polishing, make sure you polish it. I recommend, especially if you have something that's a little more ornate, like this particular guard, make sure you use a brush instead of merely like using a cloth to do that, because otherwise you'll get residue of whatever polish you're using all over, which is not what you want to do. A few caveats with this. So this is something that I've kind of more homebrewed, as opposed to anything that has been like taught to me by generations of folk. I will be doing my own thing with this as well. So I'll be using things that you need, right? You'll need wrapping. So this is Tsuka ito, right? I'm sure there's a Korean term, but this is the one I'm going to be using for this particular wrap. Things you will need. Need is a strong word. Something I would recommend: a pair of pliers. If you have clamps, so if you ever get tired as you're wrapping this, clamping the sides of it when you're mid-work will be good for you as well. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. So this is not necessarily common, and this wasn't part of the original, but I'm going to be adding my own Manuki. Right, so things that would go actually inside the braiding. So these are hawk feathers, both for family reasons, right? Because my family crest is to hawk feathers, but also spiritual reasons. So I believe that's everything that you probably need. Again, this is something that I've developed my own, so it's going to be a little bit different from what you're going to be seeing from more traditional people. This is honestly something that you can do if you have the Tsuka ito, right? One way you can kind of quickly gauge how much you need for the Tsuka ito actually, and pardon the weird angle, but I'm going to be like down here a lot. So just so you can kind of see, in case you're not as familiar. So this is the old one. So this is the one that was on it before. Something that I've seen on the interwebs, which allegedly is true, and this is how alleged people do it, is you can wrap the length of your Tsuka ito all the way down, making sure you really do dig it deep and really pull on the wrapping, so it really is nice and tight. Because if you're going to notice with this particular Tsuka ito, it can kind of, it's relaxed, fleshed out a little bit. But if you really tense it up, it's going to be that's the minimum it's going to be. So make sure you really use that. And if you wrap that all the way down, this is resting on something off camera, so if it slips, that's what's happening. So you can wrap this all the way down, and as you unwind it, you can measure how much that is. So that's going to take a hot minute if I do, in fact, do this for the camera. But again, making sure you're always tight with this. I guess while I'm also doing this, I'll say another caveat. So I'm actually going to wet the wrapping before I do any of this. I have just found from experience, so I've done probably about a dozen of these myself. I found if I wet the wrapping and use that as I'm doing it, it seems to give me a better hold. Now I will say for those who or more traditionalists and stuff like that, I would recommend, if you want this to last a really long time, you can do what the Federation does and use glue. That makes me sad, but you can use glue. And if you do have a strip like this, you can also kind of do another kind of cheap alternative and have double-sided tape on the sides here. That is also something else you can do. I've done that once, but it makes me sad again because of the gluey ickiness that would kind of adhere to the Tsuka Ito after you're done. So I guess another thing what I'm doing while I'm doing this, although you probably get the idea after a hot minute, is the wrapping that I'm going to be doing, as far as I understand it, is a little bit more traditional Japanese. So I'm going to be doing the alternating cross going down, as opposed to if you take a look at your Seigum, Jingum, or Kagum, they usually just have like the same downward motion this way. And just so you kind of know why there is that, not necessarily the difference, but the benefit of having the crisscross as opposed to the same line, is if things do start to come unwound. So if you're expecting, potentially, especially if this is your first time wrapping a sword, if you're expecting this to come loose, then if it is crisscrossing, it's going to maintain itself a little bit better, versus if you have it going down the same way the entire time. If it starts to come undone, it will really come undone and it's not going to be fun. So we're coming at the end here. So notice that there is still a goodly amount left over. I recommend having like a good, if this is your first time doing it and you're really not sure, it is always better to fare on the longer side. So go like an extra 2 feet, whatever that would be in terms of meters, because America, we're the only ones really using the imperial unit. But yeah, so now notice that I did not make it like super tight the entire time, so to give myself an extra foot or two is going to give me that leeway. So as I said, so if this were like going down, you could just do this and it's going to come undone relatively quickly. So as we're doing that, so that's a quick way you can measure it, right? So if you have just a long roll of it, you can estimate it based on that. Now what's unfortunate is you can't go like use the whole roll and then just kind of like cut off what you don't use, because whatever you cut, so there's a knot in here, but whatever you cut, so imagine this is what you have, we're going to be starting at the middle, right? The middle here is going to be what we're going to be engaged with, and we're going to wrapping both sides of it. So it's not like something where you can have like, oh, well, I'll just cut off when I don't need it anymore. This is actually very limiting on that. All right, so this is the Tsuka Ito in water. I'm just giving it like a little bit of a squeeze. So what we're going to do, so obviously if we're I know this is very cinematic, right? So give it a little bit of squeeze, let it retain some of its moisture as we're doing this here. Again, I believe this is more optional. That probably was terrible for the audio. I believe this is more optional than you really need to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the midpoint, right? So obviously you probably know how to do that, but put the two ends together and kind of just like run them along until you hit the middle. Now, if you are not sure about your distance, right? So if you're not sure about how much cloth you're using, be a lot more careful than I was to make sure you really are in the middle. That's where we're going to be starting, right? So we're here. All right, so we've pinched this portion. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with our sword, right? So notice that right now the blade would be facing down. And if you grab it, so I'm assuming this is what you're going to be doing if you're wrapping your own sword. If you were to grab it, so on the sword's right hand side, that's where we want to start, right? We don't want to have a little knot right there because that's where our hand is going to be. So this is where we're going to start, right? So we're going to be here. Put the center of this along the center of this. I'm going to just kind of make a little gap, slide that sword in so I don't have to like wrap it around too crazily that way. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to try to keep it angled towards you, dear camera. But again, keeping that, first just place it, make sure you're good, and then keep it nice and tight. And as you wrap it around, notice I'm going to have constant tension with the offhand. I'm going to pinch this on the sides. I'm going to push it up as far into the guard as I can, and then your hand might cramp after a hot minute, but then we're here, right? So there's going to be a rhyme and reason to things in a little bit. I'm going to try to keep things as straightforward for now. So what I'm going to do, I usually just start this way because it's easier for me. Take your left hand side. I'm going to try to do this around the camera, right? I'm going to try to put this underneath the stuff that's on the right where my thumb is still pinching. I'm going to be using my thumb mostly to pinch as opposed to my finger because my thumb is stronger. I'm going to bring this part over underneath that thumb, right? I'm going to tuck that underneath so hopefully you can see all of that. Is that making sense? Right? So again, this is the one that's on the right, noticing the one on the left is now underneath. Now keeping that pinched, I'm going to like bring that to the other side. I'm going to keep my thumb where they intersect. I'm going to twist it twice. So 1, 2. So you have that little bit of a cross. And I'm going to tuck that underneath this side here. And at this point, I'm going to put my thumb on this side to kind of keep it settled. I'm going to take what was tucked underneath, take it out, and the same thing. So twist, twist, bring that underneath the other side here, pinching both sides, and I'm back to where I started. At this point, I'm going to make sure, again, keeping tension over here, push these guys up. If you want to be really aggressive and make sure this doesn't come undone anytime soon, you can grab and really tighten the knot even more. And the same thing here. So again, now because there's no like starting point to start, right? Or you'll see what I mean in a little bit. From here, I'm going to do the same thing, right? So bring that over, pinch it, bring the side over, bring that underneath. All right, so again, using my thumb to pinch the side I'm about to fold, and then double twist, double twist, pull that underneath that side, untuck, double twist on this side. Again, pinch, bring it to the other side, even things out with the excess. Push this up a little bit if you need to. So what I usually do, notice there's going to be a top portion and a bottom portion. I start with pulling on the bottom portion a little bit, making sure that's nice and tight, and then pulling on the top knot a little bit. So this is the point where things are a little bit more complicated than what you would hope. So again, there's going to be a top portion and a bottom portion. We're going to be moving the thing that was on top first. In this case, the top is my right side. I'm going to bring this so the top is moving, right? So the top side moves over. I'm going to try to pinch it underneath my finger, but it doesn't really matter at this point. I'm going to take the other one and cross it on top. Making sense so far? I'm going to bring that over. At this point, as I'm kind of bringing it back over, I'm going to make sure that's nice and tight. And I'm going to be holding this side. So now the left-hand side is the one that can now move. So here, we're going to double twist. Again, being able to push that underneath. And then now the right hand side is able to double twist and bring that underneath. Again, and then pinch, make sure the slag is good. Pulling up, making sure again, top side goes down and then crosses over again. So this will come undone less likely, right? Again, pull on the bottom knot, pull on the top knot, and we're in the same situation, right? The top knot is the right. I'm gonna move that over first, bring the other side up and use that to pinch just because that's my pinching thumb. Pinch. And now we're going to do the left hand side double twist. And right hand side double twist. Now at this point, because we are tightening as we go, these little diamonds, so again the underside is what's on my left and my top side is on my right. And again pushing things up. So we can modify the size of these diamonds later if that's something that's more your aesthetic. But for me, I'm just going to kind of do what I can. Again, right is on the bottom. Left is on the bottom now. Bring that over. Right? Did I just do that wrong? We'll see. Bring that over. Right? And then we're going to double twist the right hand side. Double twist the left hand side. Trying to also balance this on something off screen. And again, always check that you're crisscrossing. And this is going to be the process we're going to be doing for the rest of, more or less the rest of the video until we're ready to deal with the knot. So if after a while you've started to kind of get a little bit tired, what you can use is a pair of, what are these called? These guys, whatever they're called. And just like apply some light pressure to the sides. So making sure that your wrapping is tight in your hand. You can release the clamp. That was the word I was looking for. And actually soon, so notice that this is not the side I want to add the first manuki, right? So notice that we have this portion, which is where we're going to be grabbing. So I'm going to do one more of these so we can kind of get closer to that, right? And then we're going to start adding the manuki if you want to. Again, the purpose of the manuki is it's obviously a lot more ornamentation, like there's necessarily practical reasons behind it, but if there is anything personal that you want to affix to your sword, that is potentially a source that you can do that. My brain is not doing what I want. So again, at this point, clamping, if you were to grab it, noticing your pinky wouldn't necessarily be touching, you don't necessarily want it touching too much, but at this point, where I am is probably where I would want to have some of the manuki, right? So at this point, so what I'm going to do is if you want to take your manuki, if there's a certain orientation that you would want it, kind of try to sneak that guy in there, right? And we're going to try to do the same. So again, in this case, my left hand side is on top, so that's going to be moving over first. I'm going to pinch. And the main thing is as we're doing our first roll, so it's 1, 2, because this is going to be underneath, I'm going to try to slide that underneath and kind of trap it there. And the same thing here. So twist, twist, and trapping it underneath the wrapping. So let me first tighten that and again, always making sure you're kind of pulling the wrapping up a little bit and then tightening. Again, checking. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Again, if I were to grab, it doesn't seem to be in the way. So also at this point, once you lay the one that's on, if you have the sword blading down, the left-hand side, the right is not going to be that much further behind. So at this point, if again, keeping this pinched. We're going to do one more round, right? So the left is on top, so left moves over first, moving that over again. So pinch, double twist, wrap on now. So noticing that I use my middle finger to keep it pressed against it, and then wrap the other side down. Again, from here, making sure that we press this up, tighten. So at this point, again, if I were to grab, I don't feel anything here. And if I pinch again and I grab on this side, I do want to introduce some manuki soon. Right? I know you can't really see, but there is going to be just enough of a gap underneath here that I would want to have that in. So what I'm going to do is, as we're here, so again, now my right hand side is on top. I'm going to move that first, pinch the left underneath, bring the wrapping over, double twist, again double twist, keep braced, pull, push this up, pull the bottom side first, pull the top side second. So at this point I want to add the second manuki, right? So again, if I were to grab here, there's just enough space for that. So I'm going to have this set up, again having the orientation that you want it to have. Sometimes that does matter. So in this case, the right is on top, so that's going to move first. Move that over, pinch, bring it to the other side. Again, double twist. Again, before you really tighten this portion, you want to make sure that the manuki is exactly where you want it, because that will be very difficult for you to move later. I think I have it where I do. And unpinch, pull it back in the spot, double twist. And again, before you really tighten, make sure it is exactly where you want it to be. I want it a little bit more over. And if you have difficulty, remember you do have a pair of pliers nearby, because you will be needing those later. Kind of get that where you want that to be. Like that. That looks good to me. Once you have it where you want it to be, press the Tsuka Ito up, tight as you dare. And at this point, it is going to be pretty much just finishing the wrap until we get to the very bottom. And as you get to pretty much like where you have like barely enough for one more line, we're going to start to think about how to tie this up, right? So we're going to do one more line, so we actually do meet the bottom. And this is where you're going to want to have those pliers. So I can squeeze that in just enough. And one more on this side. Great. Tighten that as much as you want. At this point, if you want to focus on tightening a little bit later, you can do that as well. Now you won't be able to do too much tightening, but you can do a little bit more at the bottom. So at this point, things get a little bit eccentric a little bit. So this is something that I do. This is not how traditional people do it, but mostly because I don't have like fancy, glue to kind of keep the knot together and all of that crazy stuff. So this is like my homebrew of this. So it's going to depend on which one of the sides is underneath on the row above the one we're dealing with. So in this case, the row beneath is the one that's starting on the left-hand side. So we're going to take our happy little pliers, and this is going to look sacrilegious. I'm going to try to get underneath that. So for me, it's going to be easier going along the wood, right? Now, if you're using a full sagawe wrap, you probably want to go full traditional. If you already are doing a full sagawe wrap, you're not watching a YouTube video. But yeah, so assuming that you have the side wood here, it's going to be a little bit easier for me to get my bearing on that side. I say that as I don't do that. Because you also don't want to ruin the actual wrap either. So I'm going to try to sneak that in. At this point, it's going to be a lot of work to keep this grip, so be careful. Oops, let me actually retighten my grip. So noticing it's on the right hand side, I'm going to start to try to feed the stuff on my left hand side underneath this way. So not tucking this way, we're eventually going to fold it underneath both of them. So trying to keep a nice happy open mouth with that. I know as a one person job this is going to be really fun, but do your best as we try to feed this guy into the pliers without much success, because then it also closes. Get that guy and feed that through. And you can also try to be aesthetic with this if you want to. If you want to have a fold here, that might be fine. Just knowing as we tighten it might get a little bit weird regardless. That seems fine for me. Then we're going to have to do the same thing with the other side. I know this is not probably picking up nicely. I'm going to feed that guy up. Take my left hand side, and using whatever leverage you can manage, and try to feed that guy underneath as well without breaking your studio. When in doubt, use the gut. Again, you don't want to ruin the actual wrapping either, as in the cloth wrapping. And as we do that, again, trying to get the slack out first. Trim that later, that's okay. Okay. And you can pull that down as well. So at this point, you can kind of work on tightening the whole deal, right? And kind of seeing what works just aesthetically for you. So I'm okay with that fold over on both sides. What we're going to want to do later is we're going to be feeding these both underneath. So at this point, if you want to keep tightening, you can. Now you can tighten a little bit later by using the pliers. I'm actually going to trim the edges off this because the maker actually burned the edge, which makes sense because you don't want unwinding. However, it's harder to get that through, so I'm going to probably trim that soon. But now what we're going to do is take these guys, I'm going to feed them underneath the whole knot there. So we're going to be going in from the other direction. Trying to go underneath both knots. You can pull these up a little bit if you want to. Maybe going in along the sides. Open up and try to feed that through. Again, the joys of one person both filming and doing everything yourself. So we're going to do that. Try to get a good amount through, because if you have only the very edge of it clamped down, you might just pull some threads. So pull that best you can. Once it's through, use your hands to get the slack out. Okay. And once you have that, just try to prettify it as much as you want to, and eventually working on tightening, because this is now your weak point. So a little bit of that, right? And again, you can kind of use your pliers and try and get back in there, seeing which portion is going to help you tighten it, right? So we have that guy. So what works for me is, once you have it like all the way through, at least mostly through, twisting it as opposed to pulling, because that might actually pull some threads out as well. That should be also underneath this one. And once you have a pretty good feel for whether or not that's tight, just have a good feel for the wrap, right? If you want to try to do any tightening, you can. But at this point, what I'm going to be doing, again, this is not traditional in vaguely the slightest sense. I'm going to be pulling this much up underneath the rows. I'm going to try to prettify the sharpness of the angles later. But this is just to make sure that this doesn't come randomly loose. Now if you're feeling ambitious, you can actually like do the whole like fold under and then use some glue, tuck underneath. This is where I'm going to be right now. So first I'm going to trim this so it's not as much slack I have to pull through, and then I'm just going to keep pulling that underneath the double knots. As I said, so now I'm aiming for the one that's underneath both of them. If you want to start with the side along the wood, that might give you a little bit more leeway. Or if you're just feeling ambitious, just go straight for it. And get in there, open it best you can, try to feed both of these through. You can do one at a time, but you know, you can if you want to. I'm going to try to feed both, pinch, try to pull those through. And at this point, you just want to make sure that they're going to be even. If you keep doing that, they might start to fold over and stuff like that. But and another thing you can do at this point is start to clean up the edges as you want. Right. So what I'm going to do is just bring this, try not to use too much of the edge, and just using that to kind of like smooth out the contact point. Just by the nature of it, it's not going to be that crisp because this technique is not probably used by many people. Yeah, so we're just going to keep this going up, right? So we're going to aim for the underside, trying to feed that through, open it up, feed through a little bit more. Whoops. And as we finally, so I usually put underneath 3, but as we get there, you can finally trim the last 2. And then, again, try and keep it nice and close with that. And that is more or less how I'm going to be doing it. What we're going to do later is a little bit more cleaning up, so there's a little bit more, diamond-like of the gaps. But this is, in general, how I like to wrap my swords. Noticing that it's relatively secure. I mean, better than relatively. It is pretty secure, and it is going to be pretty comfortable to use. So we're going to probably stop with that. And again, if you ever have any trouble, not ever, but the main thing is probably make sure the bottom portions, especially if this is not big enough. So this is one issue with Korean swords in particular, because they don't have that that hole on the bottom that you feed things through to kind of keep everything affixed, and you just have this bottom. You want to make sure that this really is as tight as you can make it, right? So you want to use your pliers, make sure that really, the bottom portions are pulled in. That's going to be about it for now. And that's about it, right? So at this point, if you want to, again, nitpick, right? So again, using your pliers to make sure the squares are a little bit more square if you want to. Again, kind of going with the wind, kind of unwind it a little bit, and then kind of reaffixing it. That's something that you can do to make it a little more pretty. Obviously let it dry, right? Again, I think the wetness aspect was more something that I thought would work and hasn't not worked. So I just keep doing it. However, you may not need to do that. Again, this is my own kind of homebrew of doing it, so however you want to do it, feel free to do it the way that is more comfortable for you. And also, again, this is kind of weird to say at the end, so I should probably have said this earlier, but obviously if your hands are cramping and stuff like that, make sure you use those clamps to kind of keep the wrapping in place and kind of give yourself a little happy, stretch, right? Making sure that nothing's going to cramp for any long-term stuff. So make sure you stay safe as you do that, which is the usual thing, right? So at this point, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training. Haidong.